Hi guys, Lisa here again, and I want to talk to you a little bit about cookie decorating posture. Eventually you're going to find out what you like and what's comfortable for you. We're all different heights, you know, we have different ergonomics and our hands are different sizes, all that good stuff. But for me, when I'm actually decorating, I'm really quite close to my decorating surface. I want to see every little thing on the cookie. So I'm only about a foot away, but when I'm decorating, I get about 6 inches close to my cookie. So I've got my cookie here. I'm gonna angle you down a little bit so you can see how close I get to my decorating surface. This gives me the most control. And sometimes I have my elbow on the top of the table. Sometimes I have it right here. It just kind of depends on what's comfortable for me that day. And sometimes I'll even brace my hand a little bit if I need a little bit of extra control. Just like this. To get ready for our piping exercise, you're going to need a cup, and I fit my piping bags in the cup so that it's easier to transfer my icing into here. More on that shortly. You're going to need tipless piping bags, a pair of very sharp scissors. I love to use fabric scissors, and a scribe. So this is something that is very pointy. It helps manipulate our icing, gets rid of any extra air bubbles, as well as spread the icing around if there's a little gap. So you can get all of these online. We'll link you to them. You can also use a toothpick. Alright guys, we are going to fill our tipless piping bags with our icing. First thing we're going to do is stick my hand in the middle of the bag and kind of push it into the cup and pull the edges of the bag around the outside of the cup. That just allows me to have an easy way of filling the bag. And you can kind of layer bags too in the future if you want to do a couple at a time. And then all I do is I pour the icing in using a spatula, trying to get as much of it out of the bowl as I can. I'm actually using like a small mini rubber spatula here, and then I'm going to shove my spatula into the icing bag, and this is how I get as much of it off of the spatula as I can. I put my hand around both sides of the spatula and I kind of squeegee it off. There you go. It's pretty clean. The spatula is pretty clean. I pull the top of the bag kind of straight out, even it out, and I'm going to tie a knot in it. You can also use a clip. This is just how I prefer to do it. I actually prefer to underfill bags a little bit because I have small hands. So we're going to tie a knot in the bag. You want to pull that knot pretty tight to make sure that as you apply pressure on your bag, none of it comes flying out the back. Alright guys, now I'm going to talk you through a couple of things that I'm going to be doing to prep for starting our icing practice on these sheets. These sheets are available as PDF downloads as a part of your course, so be sure to print them out, laminate them, or put them in sheet covers so you can use them over and over again. So the first thing I'm doing here is you can kind of see me, I'm massaging my icing bag. It's something I like to do if I've kept the icing sitting around for a couple of hours. That massage just really ensures that you get the icing to come back together. I'm also going to trim off the excess bag that's kind of dangling so nothing hits me as I'm trying to ice. So here we go. This is how to use a tipless piping bag. All of our bags have a seam down the middle. It should be really quite flush with the bag, but you'll definitely know that it's a seam. The reason why I point it out is this is the one thing that will really guide your hand positioning and your icing piping positioning as you pipe. When you orient yourself, you're always orienting with the seam. So
I'm just pointing it out here, showing you that there's one seam. And I'll keep touching it, but I just want to make sure you guys are always aware of that seam. And we're going to cut our tipless piping bags by pinching the tip and then cutting it straight across. You have to make sure that your seam is right down the middle. Very, very important. That way when you're piping, the seam is not impacting the icing coming out of that bag. You want to pinch it very, very flat so that it is flush and easy to cut. We're giving you a better look here. So pinching it completely flat, seam down the middle. And we're going to cut it with some very sharp scissors, straight across, starting small, because you can always cut your hole bigger, but if you cut it bigger, you can't uncut it. So if you cut it too much, you got to put it in another bag. But always start small, put your finger behind it to brace so that you don't over trim, and then trim it straight across. You can see how it's straight across, perpendicular to the seam that's oriented down the middle. And when it comes out, you want to ensure that the icing comes out the bottom, which is not seam side. All right, I'm just cleaning myself off using these eco towels here. And here you go. Whenever you're cleaning your tip, you need to use a pinching motion to clean the tip. Never wipe it. Never just like take the tip and like shove it around your paper towel. Always pinch. That way you can prevent the tip from clogging. And as you pipe, things dry up, right? That's just a normal part of icing, no problem. Just pinch it and clean it out that way. And you'll pinch out a little bit of icing and it's no big deal. So that's what we're trying to do here. So this is how we're going to pipe. This is the piping basics that you're going to need for the entirety of your cookie decorating journey. You're going to hold it with the seam facing up or facing you, and just hold it at the top of the bag with most of the icing in your hands as if you're stabbing somebody. Some people like to hold it like a pencil or a different way, but I prefer to hold it like this so I have the most control over all the icing that's in my hands. You want to make sure that as you're outlining, you're more at a 45-degree angle, and when you're flooding or filling it in, you're at more of a 90-degree angle. So 45 degrees for outlining, I'm going to show you very shortly here, and then 90 degrees for flooding or filling it in. And you'll see why later. So I'm flooding right now, I'm at a 90-degree angle. And now I'm outlining, I'm more at a 45-degree angle. It's much easier to do it that way. The concept doesn't change even if you're left-handed. Let me clean off my tip and let's get down to our practice sheets. So we're going to start with the lines. Seam oriented down the middle. You're going to hold it like you're stabbing someone with most of the icing in your hands. You will gently start to apply pressure. I like to put my finger sometimes on the bag, from my other hand on the bag or on my hand for a little bit of extra support. You will touch down when there is a sharp change in directions, applying even pressure, dragging and dropping, letting the icing fall behind you to create that smooth outline, keeping distance between your piping bag and whatever you're piping on. In this case, it's the paper, or it could be your cookie. And you only touch down if there's a sharp change in direction. So right here at the beginning, at the end is the only time I touch down. Even pressure, release pressure toward the end, and completely release pressure and pull up. Touch down, even pressure, release pressure, touch down. Touch down, even pressure, release pressure, touch down. At the beginning, always make sure your icing tip touches the surface of your cookie so it can have something to hang on to, or else you're going to end up with these huge bulbs of icing at the beginning if you're just dropping it. So the icing sheets here have a progressively more difficult piping pattern. We started with the lines and now we're doing little curves. This really allows you to practice touching down at sharp changes in direction. And anytime you do have a sharp change in direction, you can kind of take a break as well as what you're seeing here. So let it drag and drop, falling behind you. And whenever you're touching down, you're not applying that much pressure. It's only when you're piping that you're applying more pressure than when you touch down. Touching down is always kind of you're letting the pressure go. And at the end there, I didn't touch down. I just kind of let it go, and you can see how it just flicked out. So here we're going to have one continuous long motion because it's all curves. And this is a great way to get to know how your icing behaves, if it's the right consistency. If it's running all over the place, then it's too runny. Take it out, add more powdered sugar, rebag it. And I'm even allowing myself to pause a little bit because sometimes you'll get an air bubble in your icing. That's a totally normal thing, and it can cause a little break in your icing. And you notice there I didn't touch down, so it kind of, dragged out. But here, I just patched up that little bit using a little bit of extra icing. You can always use the help of a scribe to go and clean things off, or use a butter knife to clean things off. That's okay. Mistakes happen, and I want to just show you that this is real life. You can always start back wherever you are, even if it is a curve. You just have to know how to fix it. Check this out, a little bit of a bulb right there because there's too much icing, and I'm using a scribe to kind of blend it back in together and then scrape the rest of it off. There's very little things that can't be saved in cookie decorating. You just have to be willing to see that it can be saved, that is. So here we're going to do triangles, outlining still, touch down, pull up, drag and drop, touch down, pull up, drag and drop. Touching down only when there is a sharp change in direction. And now we're going to fill it in. So orient your bag 90 degrees above the cookie and apply more pressure than you think you would, allowing the icing to pull around your tip. And then use your scribe to help even out the surface of the icing. The scribe tool, a toothpick also works, using either small back and forth motions or circles to smooth out that icing. This is going to take practice. And you're going to do it over and over again until you get comfortable. So we're going to do that again. But I'm going to pinch off the tip and clean off my piping bag. And we're going to do it on this square here. Very similar concept when it comes to outlining, flooding, 90 degrees. We are not making spaghetti. No, I see that so much. That's going to cause a ton of air bubbles. We're pressing the tip in and allowing the icing to pool around the tip. Filling in that empty space. And if there are spaces that have some gaps in it, no big deal. We're going to go ahead and use our scribe to fill in those spaces. We're oscillating the icing so that it can settle smoothly. And sometimes at the end you'll get these peaks, and you want to push them as much into the surface of your icing as you can. As flush to the surface of the icing as you can. Give it a jiggle, because sometimes that really helps it settle all the way down. Let me show you how we do the dots and circles. All you do is pretend you're flooding for dots. It's very simple. We'll get to troubleshooting things like craters later. But hearts are really basically dots that you've dragged and adjusted your pressure. So more pressure at the beginning, releasing pressure and dragging your icing bag. Now, here, we're going to do the heart, touching down only when there's a sharp change in direction. Keep distance between your piping bag and your surface, and then flood it in. Use your scribe, go into it. Don't pull your scribe out of the icing like I'm doing right here. That's going to create peaks and air bubbles. So that's not what you want to do. You want to have the tip of your scribe dug into the surface of your icing, not all the way down, and oscillate back and forth to really agitate that icing. Again, don't use the pulling up motion. Get as flush to the surface of the icing as you possibly can when you're trying to get rid of those final little peaks. Hi guys, so I've got a friend here. She's going to read out some of our FAQs for royal icing and piping, and we're just going to have a casual chat and talk about all these questions that have been coming in throughout the years. All right, so one of the most common questions we get is how to flavor our icing. I like to use a basic vanilla for almost all of my cookies. So if my cookie base is chocolate or snickerdoodle or lemon vanilla, I like to stick with that basic vanilla. We can use vanilla extract, yes, but you can also use Loran flavoring oils. They come in all different flavors. You've got lemon, key lime, cinnamon, what else? Banana. You can get crazy with it. You also want to stay away from oil-based flavorings because that's going to break your icing. Also, in addition to all of that, you kind of want to consider whether or not you want to use artificial flavorings or not. Some people are definitely more sensitive to artificial flavorings. It might leave a weird aftertaste. So as long as you try it out and you've tested it, it's pretty endless with how you can flavor your royal icing. I love to make my royal icing in the stand mixer because it's the easiest way to just not have to babysit your icing with, you just don't have to stand there and mix it or anything like that. You can also use a hand mixer to make your icing. You just have to stand there and hold your hand mixer the whole time. It gets a little messier because you have to kind of move it around the bowl and you have to, I got a puppy. You got to move it around the bowl and just make sure that all of your icing and sugars and meringue powders and all of that get incorporated adequately, but it's totally possible. You want to use the same type of method when using a hand mixer as a stand mixer. So everything happens in the same order, in the same way. The only difference is you're holding that mixer instead of just letting it stand on its own. Salt is an interesting topic when it comes to royal icing and whether or not you choose to use it at all. A lot of people don't even have salt in their icing. That's totally okay. I choose to add it because it cuts down on the sweetness just a tad, like takes the edge off. And when you get that feeling when you swallow sugar and you swallow it and you accidentally choke on it, it really reduces the chance of that happening. There's also a gazillion types of salt on the market. You've got the big, flaky, fancy sea salts that people top, chocolates and caramels with or something like that. But you've also got the really fine, just regular table salt. I feel like as long as it's pretty fine, stuff that you would generally put to flavor your food that's not the big flakes, you should be good. Some people can taste the subtle differences between various types of salt. I cannot. So I go for a medium coarseness kosher salt and it works great for me. In our icing process video, you saw the state of the icing change from, everything's not incorporated to everything is incorporated but looks kind of opaque like a glaze. And as you beat it and you activate the meringue powder a little bit more, it becomes fluffier-ish, kind of like a runny marshmallow fluff. And that's usually where we stop for most purposes. But you can actually overbeat your royal icing. Right now, that entire end-to-end process happens in about a 2 to 3 minute period. But if you go beyond that, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, it will become very voluminous and full of air bubbles. If you're using icing that's overbeaten like that, it's not going to settle very well. You might have bumps in your icing. but the structure will also be very, very weak because you've beat so many air bubbles into it. It's possible that it will never dry. And if it does dry to the touch, if you put your finger on it, it's going to crumble. So that's something that you want to watch out for. If it becomes too voluminous, you've overbeaten it. The only way I know of to remedy that is to let it sit, let the bubbles deflate as much as possible for about 24 hours, make a fresh batch of icing that has not been overbeaten, and kind of combine those two together, just stirring them together, being careful to not incorporate more air. And you'll be able to kind of save your icing that way. One of the things that might happen when you're piping is that you'll notice the icing coming out of the tip and it's curling. There's a couple of reasons why that can happen. So one is the hole of your piping bag is not big enough, so as it's coming out, it's just on the struggle bus trying to get out. The other is that the seam might have a little flap on it, so make sure you cut all of that flap off if there is one. And the other is your consistency to piping bag hole ratio is not quite right. So this kind of goes back to if your consistency is a little too thick and or your hole is a little too small, it's gonna come out curly. But what can also happen is you might have a little clog. So maybe a little bit of dry ingredient didn't get mixed all the way in with the wet and it's kind of clogging the tip. So go in and pinch out the tip gently and just remove that clog. You can usually sort of feel it. It could be an extra grain of salt or an extra bit of meringue powder. So you can kind of pinch it and get rid of it that way. So all those things will help. And in the worst case, take it out, remix it, rebag it, and play around a little more to see if you can figure out what's going on with that curl. So that's it, you guys. Those are the basics to royal icing, how to make it, and some just basic piping and coloring techniques. We have a lot of this summarized in a handout for you, so make sure that you go download it and read through it. If you have any other questions or concerns, comments, please do reach out to us. We're gonna have that contact info towards the bottom on the side somewhere. You'll be able to get a hold of us. And if there's any specific topic you'd like to see in the future, definitely let us know. And keep in mind, icing is all about practice and consistency. So the more repetition you can get in, the better you're going to get. Everybody prefers a different piping feel, piping consistency, piping speed. And with practice, you're gonna find what works best for you.